Congressman John Conyers ends his historic career amid sexual harassment allegations, and the fierce jockeying for his job is on. Plus, a change in Detroit's skyline is on the way, and a One Detroit special report on the most polluted zip code in the state. Nolan and Stephen are here, and MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago? In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining me. We have a lot to get to, including an in-depth report on pollution in Southwest Detroit and the dynamics and debate on changing the Detroit skyline. But we are starting with the resignation of Congressman John Conyers this week amid allegations of sexual harassment. He made his announcement on the radio, said his legacy of fighting for civil rights and representing the people of Michigan for 53 years will not be tarnished by the accusations. And he said his son should run for his seat. We'll start right there. Let's bring in our MiWeek contributors. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's always good to see you, and what a week it has been. I listened to the announcement on the radio, and it was kind of like burying the lead a little bit before Congressman Conyers got to the point where he actually endorsed his son first before he said he was retiring. And it also struck me looking at both of the newspapers this week and how you kind of cover a retirement like that or a resignation like that, and how different the coverage would have been should he have retired in a different way. Nolan, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, had he gone out in 2014, for example, when there was a tremendous amount of pressure on him not to run again because of his diminishing health and his diminishing mental faculties. And there were a lot of people in Democratic circles, the unions and what have you, begging him not to run. He told them then, support me one more time and I won't run again. And then he turned around and did it in 2016. You could imagine if he would have retired at the end of that 2014 term, he would have gone out as a hero.
Will his legacy be diminished in any way? He says no, because again, of all the work that he had done beforehand, how do you balance that, Stephen?
I think the work stands on its own. I mean, this is somebody who for 50-some years has been a voice for equality and justice and all of these things that on the left side of the political ledger we hold pretty high esteem. That doesn't mean that the circumstances that led him to leave office don't matter. They do matter, and it's a tragic end to what otherwise would have been a completely heroic story. But I don't think one diminishes the other in any way.
When we're looking at now the lineup of people who are eyeing his seat right now, and especially looking at two family members, State Senator Ian Conyers, who's his grandnephew, and then his son, John Conyers III. Nolan, how do you even engage what kind of family dynamic we're looking at there?
Well, neither are qualified, neither have any business running for the Senate or the House, except for their last name is Conyers. Now, you'll have to see how well that name holds up in an election. Detroiters have now been burned twice by people with last name in the last name of Conyers. Whether there's an appetite for a third one, particularly now we learn his son has been involved in domestic abuse and a domestic abuse issue, other issues. He was photographed earlier on sitting in a government vehicle, Escalade, with a bottle of champagne when he was 20 years old. There's a lot in this kid's closet already at a very young age. I don't know Ian Conyers that well. He seems like his resume is fairly thin compared to a lot of the other people who are going to be in this race. And I think this race is going to draw some big names. I think it's going to be very attractive
Yeah,
to a lot of people.
I would
Who else
say
do you
Ian
think we're
Conyers. So
gonna see?
Ian
Yeah.
Conyers, I would go back though to talk a little bit about Ian Conyers, who has not had a lot of time to establish a record because he's young and new to politics. But I've actually talked to him a number of times, gotten to know him. He's a really impressive young public servant.
He might
and
be
this
ready
is somebody
someday.
this is somebody who could be a U.S. congressman. I don't know if now is the time or later, but I certainly wouldn't disqualify him offhand. I think he should earn it on his own and not on the name. I do think this idea of a Conyers succeeding a Conyers in Congress may not sit not just with a lot of Detroiters, but with the other folks who are represented by this district.
Yeah, I mean, it's
southwest suburbs, the western suburbs.
It's a 35% suburban district.
Yeah, I don't know that they will go along, and so that opens up the opportunity for somebody else to come along and sort of run up the middle.
It also brings up the larger conversation of what's in a name and looking at local politics and how names have gotten people very far. And even you see the retirement, we haven't talked yet about Sandy Levin and the fact that his son Andy is now going to be running for his seat. We have the Dingle dynasty as well. You have the Kildees up in the Flint area, and the Bushes, the Clintons. I mean, so the Kennedys. What is in a name still these days?
Well, it depends on the person who's carrying the name. You don't know that the second generation is going to be what the first generation, or the third generation is going to be what the previous generation. You just don't know. If you're judging a candidate mostly on the name, be prepared to get what you get. I mean, in the case of Sandy Levin, his kid's name Andy Levin. If the kid's name was his son, he's 50-year-old, but if the son's name was Andy Levine, would he measure up as a viable candidate for this seat? I would say no. He hasn't been around here that much. He's got a thin resume when it comes to public service. There's a lot of other people who are going to be in that race with bigger resumes. So it depends on whether people get confused when they go to the box.
So do you think people are tired of the name?
Oh no! Are you kidding?
I was just going to
say. I mean, it's one of the things that plays really well in Detroit politics and Michigan politics to some extent. Is if you're the offspring of somebody who's in office, you have exponential.
The
more
office
chance
becomes
of
a family
becoming
asset.
office itself. Now, the other dimension of this I think is really interesting. So you'll have the Conyer seat that's open. You'll have the Levin seat that's open. You'll have the Upton seat that's open. Is that right?
Upton's running.
He's running. Okay. Was there someone else who announced?
I think those are the only two.
Those are the only two.
But those will be, since they're both in southeastern Michigan, both in Metro Detroit, those will be very interesting races. Yeah. I think they'll draw a lot of attention. We've already seen...
And 4 elections in the Conyers seat because of this. We have to have a primary and a general for the special, and then the regular one.
That's probably coming up really fast. Yeah. And so this is going to be a sprint for these candidates, because whoever wins that first round is very likely going to win the second.
It also reminds me of Dave Trott is not running also again for his seat.
Yeah.
But so what does that mean in terms?
So that is 3.
So what does that mean in terms of clout, congressional clout for the state of Michigan and losing a lot of these?
Yeah. So there are 3.
Dave Trott's only been around 2 terms.
Yeah, he was still low in seniority,
tired of,
but he was in the majority party.
Yeah.
Both Levin and Conyers were in the minority party. I think both were ranking members of their committees. That carries some clout, but not like when you're in the majority. When you see a lot of folks drop out when their parties are in the minority, because it's just not as much fun. You don't have the same sort of power. So in that sense, and they were both older and not sort of the dynamic personalities they once were. So I think in that sense, we don't lose a whole lot of clout this round. Last round, we lost a great deal.
I also always
3
wonder,
chairmen.
I always wonder about people who so enthusiastically run for these seats in the current climate. I mean, the House has changed so dramatically so that if you are in the minority party, you really have no power. I mean, the majority really locks the minority out in a way that they didn't in the past. These jobs, you have to run for them every 2 years, which means as soon as you're elected, you have to start raising money. People, the constituents are more ornery universally than they historically have been. You wonder, once you get these seats, how satisfied people are. And I think that's something that factored into Dave Trott's decision to leave. I think who's the new guy near in Candace Miller's seat. Paul
Mitchell.
Mitchell, right? You wonder how is he finding the work in Washington. Is it as much as you thought it would be?
And it'll be interesting to see again what happens in 18, though, in terms of
18's going to be an amazing election.
Power. Absolutely. All right. Well, you know, next week marks the start of construction on what will be Detroit's tallest building on the old Hudson site along Woodward. It's an ambitious project from Dan Gilbert's Bedrock Real Estate, a change in the skyline, and significant investment in Detroit's future. Since crews imploded the historic Hudson's building on this site almost 20 years ago, Detroiters waited for what's next.
I remember when they knocked the building down, and it was a very depressing time for Detroit. And now here is the rebirth, and I think it's wonderful. This month, shovels hit the dirt to start construction on the city's tallest building and what is destined to be Dan Gilbert and his Bedrock Real Estate Company's landmark development. The plans at the Hudson site boast an iconic design with dynamic public space, including 1 million square feet of retail, office, event space, and residential. The 800-foot tower will have an observation deck. Price tag? An estimated $900 million. Part of the construction is made possible through tax incentives that Gilbert and his team lobbied the state legislature for this past spring, along with the Detroit City Council. Gilbert's investment has reshaped downtown development since he moved his company, Quicken, to Detroit in 2010. Thousands of employees followed, as did the purchase of now more than 90 properties in the city.
In Detroit, I think that would bring more business, and I think that's good for Detroit, that it would definitely bring a lot more business and to get people a little more interested than coming down rather than going to the game.
I'm liking the jobs that's being created, not only the construction jobs, but some production jobs, manufacturing jobs, stuff of the nature is really actually helping the city itself.
Now this project changes the Detroit skyline on the site of the old Hudson's building, which once was a symbol of Detroit's prosperity and eventual decline. Detroiters say there's something poetic about putting something cutting edge on an iconic spot.
I think it's just building more on the momentum that has already started. You know, so I think the first push has already happened. We're out here on this beautiful day and there's people walking around in the queue line and all these new restaurants and stores and buildings. So I think this is just going to elevate it even more.
Interesting. So changing the skyline. Nolan, what do you think this building is going to do for, I guess, maybe Detroit's reputation, and how will people feel about seeing this building?
Well, to me, it sort of, for so long, we were altering the skyline by diminishing it. You know, you look at the skyline and it had more and more gaps in it. And now we're starting to fill those gaps. This will be a huge statement, I think, that Detroit is back, that it's first class, that it's not doing things small, that it's doing things very, very big.
You look at those renderings, though, Stephen, and it's hard to kind of grasp or get an idea of what that is actually going to look like in the skyline of Detroit.
I'm not a fan of that particular project. I think some of the other things.
Why? The architecture, or?
I think it's too big for where it's going. I think it's going to look strangely on the skyline. But more than that, I think there needed to be a more robust discussion about that architecture in that space. I mean, we continue to just let developers do whatever they want to do in Detroit, and other cities don't behave that way. I think it's time we start acting like a big city and dealing with, do we need this? Also asking a little more questions about how we finance these things. There's a lot of public money going into a project that does not benefit most of the city. I don't know how many times we're going to do that and continue to sort of say, well, it's okay because it's downtown. That's not a great argument.
Nolan?
No, I think it benefits the whole city and the whole region. The stronger you can make downtown and the more vibrant and the more people you can bring in, I think the more revenue the whole city will enjoy. I mean, hopefully you're going to draw a lot more folks.
Giving a lot of that revenue
into Detroit.
away.
It's revenue you don't have now. So if you it's generating revenue, and if you bring these folks in, and if you can convince them to live in Detroit and to play and eat and dine in Detroit, that's good for the whole city. I would argue that what we've seen happen downtown over the last 10 years, is why we're today seeing good things happening in neighborhoods and people starting to pay attention.
A lot of neighborhoods not benefiting from that.
But a lot are.
Yeah. All right. Well, and finally tonight, a One Detroit special report taking a closer look at the impact of heavy industry on the quality of life in Southwest Detroit. People living in this part of the city have been concerned for years about potential pollution, and they have banded together to try and have their voices heard. A U.S. appeals court just gave the go-ahead for a class action lawsuit against Marathon Petroleum after a lower court tossed it out. And there's a new Detroit City ordinance trying to limit fugitive dust in the air. They are the latest efforts in a zip code that's labeled the most polluted in Michigan.
There's Tri-City. They call them the Tri-Cities. It's Ecorse, River Rouge, and 48217 Detroit. And that's because all of them are very small little cities, and they all border one another.
We've just crossed into the city of Ecorse with Rhonda Anderson of the Sierra Club. She's on an impromptu environmental investigation.
We start seeing this at least 4 years ago, and I don't know how long. You still see the piles? You see them? You see how far back they're going? Oh, see, I see a crane back there. Do you see that crane moving?
The piles line the railroad tracks on land of a company that provides aggregates for construction and road building. The Detroit River is on the other side of the piles.
We need to know how far down the piles go and how far back they go.
Just looks like dirt.
It looks like dirt. What kind of dirt? Where does it come from? Where is it coming from? And it's getting higher and higher. The last time I was out here, the piles were much lower.
It's their property. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't they just be able to do whatever they want? It's their property.
No, they can't do just anything they want, not when what they dump on their property has an impact on residents. We talked to a couple of guys that lived over here. They were the ones that was telling us that this stuff is blowing off of the piles onto their homes. Excuse me? Hi. Can you tell me how long has those piles been over there?
This woman says the piles were here when she moved in.
You've been there 7 years? Do you know what it is?
She doesn't know. Daniel Burgess lives a few streets over. He doesn't know either.
Yeah, our cars, we've called numerous people about the
dust?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I heard it was kind of metallic.
It's gritty.
Yeah.
My son had to buy some kind of a pad. It cost $40 just to get that off of it.
And it was on his car?
Yeah, it's on everybody's car.
Yeah. So this is it. If it's on your cars, it's getting into your lungs.
Yeah, no doubt. I worked in that mill over there for 36 years.
Did you?
I got asbestos.
Decades ago, the steel mills meant good jobs for both whites and blacks. People used to walk to work. Now many who work at the plants can afford to live somewhere else.
My dad worked over here for 30 years and retired. My dad retired at the age of 65. He died at 67. And I say that it's a lot because of, the pollution from this place.
The third part of the Tri-Cities is 48217, the southernmost point of Detroit and the most polluted zip code in Michigan. Mostly African Americans live here, surrounded by the wastewater treatment plant, a coal-burning electric power plant, the steel mills, and there's the oil refinery.
I am going to begin with Marathon Petroleum.
In January 2016, the community hosted a hearing with Detroit City Council after the refinery asked the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality for a permit to increase its sulfur dioxide emissions by 22 tons in 48217. Sulfur dioxide has been linked to asthma and other respiratory ailments.
And to be honest, we feel the 22 tons really isn't real. At the end of the day, we think when this is up and running, the actual emission increases will be closer to 10 tons per year.
The refinery wanted a trade-off. Since it was going to make a cleaner gasoline, meaning less pollution coming from drivers across the region, then it should be allowed to emit more sulfur dioxide in 48217.
When you look at a 2-mile radius around our refinery, we represent 3% of the emissions. We are not the large source of emissions around in the southwest Detroit area. Even before we did our major expansion project in 2008, we've held true to our commitment to keep our emissions neutral. We've either been keeping emissions where they were at or on a decline since 2005.
Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan came out against the permit request. He questioned the refinery's corporate citizenship, that it reduced its emissions only because the government ordered it to.
There is only one place in the state of Michigan, one neighborhood in the state of Michigan that is non-attainment for sulfur dioxide. And if you can't see it, it's right down here. It's the area where we're sitting.
Over in Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan's School of Natural Resources and Environment has been researching poverty and the health issues in places near heavy industry. The school even has its own environmental justice program. Professor Paul Mohai has been studying 48217.
And then we also did neurological risk. And if you take the top 91 percentile, 92nd, 93rd, all the way up to the 100th, 48217 is right in the middle of the highest neurological risk in the metro area.
We are reliving Flint, Michigan right now. That's about what's happening up in this room. They used a bottle of water to explain, to show, to illustrate. Well, I have my asthma inhaler here tonight because I have to use it.
Emma Lockridge's family moved here in the 1950s, a few blocks from a small oil refinery before Marathon took over. Since then, the operation has gotten much bigger, and it's expanding still.
There's a phenomenon that happens in winter called thermal inversion, whereby the emissions cannot rise. And we're trapped in a bubble, if you will, from about November to March. And this is the period where I say we live in the refinery.
In recent years, Lockridge has become an activist and a serious photographer.
Well, I seldom leave the house without my camera, because there always seems to be something going on around here.
Her pictures have been shown in exhibitions telling her story of environmental injustice in 48217.
I've already been made sick living here with kidney failure. I have lymphoma. I am a sick person. And my thing is, I don't want to see any more children, another generation, lost to this chemical soup.
And I urge the MDEQ to deny this permit, and I don't want there to be any question about our commitment, because you cannot raise the pollutant levels on the poor area of the city that's most polluted to benefit everybody else. I believe that's a civil rights violation. And if we have to go to court, Madam President, I hope City Council will be with us. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
A few months later, the refinery promised not to increase its sulfur dioxide output after all, and got its permit. An apparent victory for the residents of 48217.
The people were asked, what do you feel is the most important environmental problem in the U.S.? And I compared black and white respondents on that national survey. For white respondents, it was overconsumption of natural resources. For the black respondents, it was pollution. Even from a survey, a national survey, you get to see that polarization about who benefits and who's paying the costs. And if residents don't have a say as to what's happening in their community, aren't they being unwittingly used to subsidize somebody else's comfort and products and benefits? And is that a fair situation?
You saw Rhonda Anderson from the Sierra Club trying to figure out what those big piles were. Well, she's since learned from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality the piles are slag. That's a byproduct from steelmaking used in concrete and in road building. We will continue to cover in-depth stories around the Detroit area. Check out our One Detroit reports at MiWeek.org. That's going to do it for us this week. We are also on Facebook and Twitter. Find us there. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you next Thursday for MiWeek. Take care.